Greetings, Dr. Joseph Martin. The philosophy of medicine, psychiatry, and psychology. This is a fascinating adventure and study for us, and certainly for me. I've spent my entire life looking at the philosophy and, of course, the history and the cross-cultural realities, ancient and modern, of all medicine, psychiatry, if you want to call it that, and psychology. Now, Einstein, who's perhaps the greatest mind in the last 100 years or so, has said that the nature of the universe and the cosmos, in fact, the cosmogenesis, is love, and that is what has created light. The universe is a safe, warm, friendly, loving place, according to Einstein in his spiritual meditations and also in his physics and quantum mechanics. Now, so therefore, we're at a great juncture here where there's a great adventure of exploration, scientific exploration about the nature and the philosophy of medicine, psychiatry, and psychology. Now, we're going to start, there's two aspects of philosophy, and I love philosophy. There's so many aspects and kinds of things to study in philosophy, but perhaps the two most important are ontology and epistemology. So we're going to start with epistemology, which is the study of how do we know what we know? How can we find knowledge? What are the means by which a human being or a human species can learn and know anything at all? And this is a great question that Plato and Socrates and Heidegger and Jaspers and so many Western philosophers, particularly the great German philosophers like Wittgenstein and Husserl, have looked at for many centuries. Now, in epistemology, I want to present a metaphor and a symbol to you because there's many things we can learn, and I will get on with how we use symbols and metaphor and poetry and music, but that's not what I mean here. If we take this simple metaphor, let's say that you had a radio or a television that could only tune into one bandwidth or channel. And that channel was only giving you the weather within a 5-kilometer radius. And within that 5-kilometer radius, whenever you turned the radio or the television or your computer on, the only channel you could receive would be what the weather is like at this moment, and not even in the future, in the 5-kilometer radius around you. Now remember, there would be no knowledge of what the human beings are doing or their activities or the events or accidents or explorations, nothing about human beings, and you would have no knowledge of the weather or the activities of human beings beyond the 5-kilometer radius. How useful would that be for you in terms of gaining knowledge about the entire planet of Earth and all the civilizations and cultures and groups and events, political and otherwise, and social events, cultural events, or any knowledge about the Sun, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, or the cosmos? If you could only tune into just the weather in the present moment, and that's the only channel coming into your mind, how useful would that be? Well, this is exactly what we're looking at when we look at the present state of the very low evolutionary stage of human mind right now in the 21st century with Western medicine. It's biologically and materially reductionistic. They're looking at very low vibrational awareness or understanding in what we call in physics the first and second and third dimensions, the third dimension being time, space, and motion. And just focusing on a very small little area unconnected to the larger open system of the universe, let alone the open system of the earth plane, and other ways and higher ways of knowledge or gaining knowledge, and just focus on one small materialistic, dense, biologically oriented aspect of what medicine can be. How useful would that be? So we're still at a very shall we say, a low evolutionary stage of understanding humanity, human species, let alone the other species on the planet, and the Earth herself, how she was created from the Sun and from our solar system and the Milky Way galaxy. So, understanding that we have a minimalistic closed system thinking when we look at any science, not just medicine, psychiatry, and psychology, we therefore are ready to get out of the box and branch out and understand, first of all, other ways of knowing. Now, that will be the topic for a different video, but there are many other ways of knowing, and I'll just point them out here briefly. There's dreams and the symbols that come in dreams. There's mythology, ancient and modern, and there's creation mythologies of all the indigenous peoples. We've lost our mythology, and we have no ruling mythology now, or cultural global mythology, which is why the civilization is falling apart and is already mythologically dead. There will be a new civilization coming, but that's another story as well. And everything is life stories. So symbols, dreams, the unconscious, archetypes, primal energy awarenesses, the magnetic, hidden, unconscious, psychological collective archetypes that rule and reign over human species and our evolution. And there are great changes that have been coming in the last 100 years, as we know from the great cataclysms and chaos of world wars, and also geological and meteorological changes that have been and will be coming still. Now, Thomas S. Khun, who wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which I deem to be the most important philosophical scientific book, that's the philosophy of how science and its theories and its practices change over time. He pointed out all the changes that have come in the last 500 years around our understanding of astronomy, the fact that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, we know the Sun is, and that the Earth was not flat and it's round, and so on, and also our understanding of astronomy. And the same can be applied through the structure of scientific revolutions about medicine and where we are now. Now, I've met Thomas Khun back when I was studying at the University of Toronto. He's an amazing man, and I'm rereading his books now. And he pointed out the fact that science in the Western scientific method, the scientific method is one of inquiry where you create an hypothesis, you find a way to test the hypotheses through some kind of scientific method with certain techniques and perhaps even certain kind of objects, or like in medicine, of course, with biochemistry or microbiology, both of which I've studied and trained in, we use heat and petri dishes and on and on and on. We understand that when you use the scientific method, you come up with some conclusions that need to be statistically verifiable several times over before you can come up with what we call scientific conclusions that seem somewhat germane or appropriate or even correct. But anything, and as a scientist well knows, any scientist should tell you, that when you use the scientific method, there are always in your conclusions and in the functioning of the process of doing the science anomalies. There are things that have come up that are unanswered questions or even unanswerable questions. You wonder how you got these results, and they don't fit with the theory that you're promulgating. Some scientists push these under the rug. That's not true science. True science is you look at the anomalies, you come up with a better theory to try to encapsulate and understand the anomalies that you've come up with during your results and your research. This is the further advancement of human science. We always need to renegotiate our theory to expand to a higher and a greater number of, shall I use my metaphor again, bandwidths. We need to expand the geographical range beyond 5 kilometers to the infinity of space, and we need to look at different bandwidths. Which leads me to one of Canada's top and first psychiatrists, Dr. Richard Morris Bucke. Bucke, who was trained at McGill University in the late 1800s, and his dates are 1837 to 1902. He was Canada's first Canadian psychiatrist. In London, Ontario, he set up the first Canadian psychiatric institution in the 1880s. Now, what is it about Dr. Richard Morris Bucke that's important for Canadians and medical doctors and psychiatrists around the world? Well, there are many things. One is that when he was a young man still, his son died, and he had some spontaneous awakenings beyond the small bandwidth of his training in medical school to cosmic consciousness, because his son from the other side came to him and he became enlightened, if you like, at a very early time when this was not even a part of the Western mentality here in Canada or North America in the late 19th century. Now, Dr. Bucke also wrote a book called Cosmic Consciousness. And the whole point of this is the fact that in the philosophy of medicine or psychology or human nature, if you like, we need to understand that the small bandwidth we've been operating from and training and teaching doctors or psychiatrists or psychologists from is not good, in the sense this isn't a judgment. It's just not adequate. It's not enough information. It's not the right open system of knowledge that would give us the highest purview and awareness of the highest capacity of very complex beings, we humans and our human species, Homo sapiens, where we come from, our cosmogenesis, where we are now, and where are we evolving into. Only with a higher knowledge will we understand that. Now, for instance, just take psychiatry, modern psychiatry. Dr. Bucke created some interesting openings back well over 100 years ago now. And when I interviewed Dr. Henri Ellenberger in Montreal back in the 1970s, and he wrote this massive tome called The Discovery of the Unconscious, which is kind of like a classical historical philosophical text for psychiatrists to read when they train, at least in Canada. And in this book, he describes, how Freud rediscovered the notion of the unconscious and the power of dreams with his book. In 1900, Freud wrote the book and published The Interpretation of Dreams, which is the first of many of Freud's great books. And then, of course, his great student who created his own study of depth psychology, Dr. Carl Gustav Jung, in which I have trained extensively over my lifetime, both with Freud, Jung, and other advanced psychiatry beyond their themes, including Dr. Alfred Adler, and on and on and on, self-psychology, self-psychiatry. Now, the unfortunate thing in the book, The Discovery of the Unconscious, is that it's, again, based on a very narrow-banded, narrow-width, materialistic study of society and human nature. It all revolves around human biochemistry and human physiology. There is a very kind of a small bandwidth of awareness of what the unconscious really is, and that's the Freudian system. Carl Jung expanded this when he allowed and understood, both within human beings as within the collective psyche, both consciously and unconsciously, that there is a vast amount of unconscious of which we know literally nothing. And until and unless we understand the vastness of our unconscious and its shadow, its archetypes, its projections, its emotional complexes, which are both individual and family and lineage and ethnically and religiously oriented, we will know nothing about why we have wars all the time and why people fight and why marriages fall apart and relationships and friendships, which are doomed to failure unless we understand the nature of shadow, ego, persona, the collective unconscious, archetypes, emotional complexes, the mother complex, the father complex, and all this, when we understand that, you can learn and train and transmute your own emotional inner complexes and regulate and harmonize and balance with the archetypes that rule and can be part of the charge of your life in an ongoing flow, where there's a grace and a flow and an energy and an exploration. And then your relationship with yourself, with the source, with your friends, with your significant other, your children and your parents can actually be harmonized, and revelations can occur, and you can create an ongoing balance and harmony and flow when you understand the unconscious and how you can make it more conscious and flow and harmonize with it. Now, the other aspect, of course, to increase the bandwidth is that we're going to need to understand the superconscious. Now, how can you do that? The superconscious is an energy vibration of the mind, and it's not necessarily the brain waves. That's just the epiphenomenon of the mind. The mind is beyond the physiology and the brain, and whereas there is a brain and genetic neuroplasticity as well, and the mind, when it's in the superconscious state through yoga and meditation, as the ancient yogis knew and the modern day yogis know, when your mind is full and pure and clear and balanced and in the superconscious state, then you can actually create some change in the brain, nervous, neurophysiology, neuroelectricity, neuromagnetism, and also in the DNA. So there's going to be some genetic plasticity. Because the physical body is simply a materialistic epiphenomenon, and scientists and medical doctors, psychologists and psychiatrists would do well to look at the body only as epiphenomenon, and it's a resultant of something from a higher frequency and vibration. That's the cause and the source of human nature. Having said all that, then we're left with the fact that what we need to do to expand into an open system is to create an awareness and a pathway and an understanding of superconsciousness. Within the superconsciousness, there are many realms, including all of the material universe, which we could call the light matter and the stars and galaxies, which is known in the spiritual traditions of humanity as the Christ or Buddha or Muhammad, peace be upon consciousness. And beyond that, the dark matter, the dark energy of the universe is the cosmic consciousness from which all things come. If we just use the cosmology of the Hindu tradition, we will see that there are cycles where Brahma creates the universe and opens his eye, and that universe is sustained for a certain period of millions of years or light years. And then at some point there's a dissolution of that universe, and all materiality disappears back into the dark energy of the universe, and that universe is over. And then he does it all again. And another universe will appear when Brahma, the creator, opens his eyes. And then we have another universe for another millions of years or billions of years. This is the understanding that will come when we understand the true nature of humanity, human species, an individual, a collective, and also the very basis of medicine, psychiatry, and psychology will be greatly expanded to all these higher super consciousnesses, which now incorporates all of the unconscious. Well, blessings upon you. This is the philosophy that's necessary to look at it, and it all wraps itself up in ontology, which is the philosophical study of the nature of reality. And the nature of reality, when we understand the Western, the Eastern, and the Indigenous peoples, ancient all the way back to Lemuria and beyond, and since, and into the future, that we're just at an evolutionary step or stage now, just coming out of the Dark Ages. We're emancipating ourselves with freedom, truth, and love to move forward in the 21st century. There's a massive global consciousness shift and change in people of all backgrounds and ages and cultures to understand that there's something more, and that's what we're all seeking. We're on the path of discovering, and thereby we will understand that the true healing, the true medicine is the source, the spirit, the love, the light, and the interconnection of the oneness of all. And in the oneness, we can do our part to purify ourselves and become one with all that is. Dr. Joseph Martin, all blessings, all love, and all knowledge, truth, and power to you on your path of self-awareness and self-responsibility. Om Namah Shivaya. Namaste.